Welcome to Auditory Precision, and I'm going to be going over some fitting for Phonak products. And like I've talked about earlier, obviously the most important thing is figuring out which domes we should use and what receiver strength. And here we're kind of dealing with something like a flat hearing loss. I definitely have damage in my low frequencies. And so if I wanted to use a standard receiver, you can kind of see where this went up. I would actually still be covering this hearing loss. Usually, if I'm kind of on the border, I tend to go with my medium receivers. But to kind of show you, if I went to say high power, I'm still encompassing everything, or it actually just switched to power. But the one thing that I want to watch for is that I really don't want to be giving all of this attention to the hearing loss. This is just way too much amplification. I really don't need all of this headroom per se. I can always change them to a power receiver later on. And so my medium tends to be a really good place to be starting with this patient. Now, as far as what I want to do here, say I wanted to use an open fit. The problem here is that my lows are worse than 40. I usually like to use open fits if my low frequencies are from 20 to 40. And when I'm talking about lows, I'm really talking about everything from about 125 even out to about 1000. I don't really care what my high frequencies are doing. I definitely don't want to be chasing those high frequencies with receiver strength or say double domes, because all that's doing, power and occluding the ear, is it's giving attention to the low frequencies. And if I do that in too much of an aggressive manner, I'm going to get upward masking, where the low frequencies being more powerful than high frequencies will mask out that clarity that I'm looking for. So probably in this case, be using vented domes. And the next thing that I do once I have figured out what domes I want to use is I'm going to go to fitting. And the first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing my feedback test. Now, because I don't have the hearing aid set up, I'm going to kind of show it to you here. If you see this purple line, if you could see how it's impeding on my prescription right here, it basically means that they're going to be cutting some of the prescription away from the patient, because anything that goes above this purple line is going to have the ability to cause feedback. And when it does its beep test, or in some manufacturers it's static, what it's doing is it's checking for a slit leak. The sound that comes out of the hearing aid that's picked up by the microphone a second time will cause the whistling of a hearing aid. And so when I run my feedback test, I want to make sure that this purple line does not impede on this, okay? The other thing that you can do is, if you're pretty close and you know that you're using the right venting, is that I can go ahead and allow a 5 decibel buffer. And you'll see it in purple, and this might give you what you need. A lot of times, if I'm not getting a correct feedback test, it's because I have too much venting, or maybe the hearing aid isn't inserted correctly. Now, what I want to do with an Audiogram Direct, which is important, and this is a good example, everything that you can kind of see in the gray is what I got with the patient in the sound booth. But depending on what type of venting I'm using on their hearing aids, that's going to change some things. And it's really important to take that into consideration, because all I'm getting from the air scores in the booth is their insertion gain. And I'm not taking into place the open ear response, which is very unique to how we amplify 3000 hertz better than others. We have this strange bump of amplitude around 2000, 3000, and anytime I stuff something in the ear, I'm going to be flattening that out and causing an occlusion response. And therefore, when I'm doing my test with occluded inserts or doing a test with headphones, I'm not really taking into consideration that open ear response. And so when I do this, the Audiogram Direct or in situ, whatever manufacturer that you're using, this is going to take my insertion gain. It's going to add this real ear response and therefore give me my insertion gain, or I'm sorry, my in situ gain, which is something that's a lot more detailed. Now, the other thing I want to do here, which is very important, you can see here, these are my UCLs. And without my UCLs, what I'm going to be doing is utilizing the MPO of the hearing aid. And I don't really need to use all of that space. And not only that, I want the patient to be comfortable, and we figured this out during our testing. So this is a great space to put in your UCLs to control the output of the hearing aid for a better fit. Now going to my global tuning. Again, my feedback's not run, so try to ignore this. But the one thing that I want to look for is that I want to make sure that when the hearing aid is at 100%, that it's following my target line perfectly, which you can see now. These lines are following my target lines. This is my insertion gain. And a lot of the times in the beginning, I might need to start them at 80%. And you can see where it dropped down below my target line. And this might be enough for them in the beginning. So I always want to be a little gentle in the beginning. I don't want it to be too bright and overwhelming, or they're going to be taking those hearing aids out. What I do with the patient is basically find the correct volume first. I don't even talk about how I sound as far as being artificial. But I do notice that, especially with Phonak, a lot of times, okay, I get my volume right, and then I'll even ask, do I sound like I'm talking into a tin can? The one thing I love about Phonak and Unitron and really any of the manufacturers in the family is that I can go to my fine tuning and go down to automatic fine tuning. And if I keep this in moderate speech and quiet and then turn this to hollow and tinny, it really takes that problem away, and now everything sounds very natural. And this is doing it by reducing the gain for moderate speech, especially in mid frequencies. So for anybody that's new and they rely on the automatic fine tuner, definitely be reading what is happening here, so that way you can also educate yourself. Obviously, if I made a change and it doesn't fix it, believe me, at 4 to 5 clicks, it's not going to fix it. If it's not fixing it right away, it's definitely not the right way to go. You also don't want to make too many changes because, well, we don't want to go too far away from their prescription. So the other thing that I can do is, if the patient, say, is back, it's been a while, they've made it to 100%, however, things are still sounding tinny. The one thing that I can do here is, instead of taking down that tinny sound in the higher end of where speech is, I sometimes like to highlight where environmental sound is. Speech is usually between 1K and 4K, whether you're a male, female, or child. 6 and 8 tend to be more environmental sounds, and if I can take this down and get that tinny edge to go away without messing with the frequencies that have a lot more to do with speech, not only am I going to fix the problem, but I'm going to keep my clarity where it should be. The other thing is, if somebody is having a hard time with their own voice, I can also take down some soft sounds, because this will make their voice sound less artificial. But do remember that these soft sounds are also where I find my S, T, and F, the consonants that I'm using my teeth, tongue, and lips for. So anytime I'm taking this down to make things sound more natural, I'm also going to be taking away clarity. So this is why counseling is so important. But the one thing that, you kind of want to go over is, okay, is it a low frequency sound, which has to do with bass and volume? Or is it a high frequency sound that has more to do with clarity and intelligibility? Now, obviously, it's a lot more complex than this, but this is just a foundational thought. Obviously, with my low frequencies, if I turn this up, the hearing aid's going to be getting louder, and it might sound smoother to a point. Once I over-accentuate this, I'm going to become occluded, and it's going to be very hollow and boomy. With my high frequencies, yes, it will become more crisp and clear as I raise these up, but too much, things will sound robotic and artificial. And so The first one is with the occlusion sound. Now, coming back here to my global tuning, I do have an occlusion manager, and if you see me put it on strong, it'll just drop down my low frequencies. The problem with this is I don't even know if this is the problem. The best way that I figure this out is if they're saying that things sound hollow and boomy and occluded, I'm going to go ahead and shut the hearing aids off up here. The reason is that if I shut the hearing aids off and it still sounds occluded, it's a venting problem. However, if I shut the hearing aids off and it's not occluded, it's only when the hearing aids are on, then I know that it's a programming issue. So that's a great trick for that. The other thing that you want to do, again, without touching too much, is the example of say the refrigerator humming. Well, a refrigerator humming I know is low frequency. I can kind of hear that in my head. Now, the other thing I got to think of is it a sound that is the same level of speech? No, it's kind of quieter than that. It's definitely not louder than speech. It's definitely not louder than speech. And so I do know that it's going to be a soft sound. So this way I don't have to just take down a huge block. I can start to isolate it. And I also know that it's going to be a soft sound. So here's my soft sound in my low frequencies. I can bring this down a bit and help with maybe a fan or a refrigerator humming without touching too much. So that's another trick that I like to do. The other thing that you're going to notice that sometimes they actually have on a lot is your frequency compression or frequency transposition. The one thing to know about this is that a lot of times if it's on, it needs to be on. But if all of a sudden the patient is saying that things sound very lispy or maybe S's are true prevalent, I'll go ahead and shut this off. That's the side effect of having that on. If they don't complain of things being lispy and S's being too intense and it came with it on, I'll usually not mess with it. But I will tell you, I either keep it on or I keep it off. I usually don't go ahead and make things more intense or less intense. The other thing when going back and talking about the refrigerator humming is that what I'm doing here is I'm taking down soft sounds, which do have a lot to do with my clarity. So the one thing that I like is the TK gain, which happens to be 35 decibels, which is even softer than our soft sounds. And the reason why I like this is because most manufacturers don't let you mess with expansion, which is a way of limiting soft sounds. The opposite is compression, right? Limiting loud sounds, which obviously is a lot more detailed now that we have wide dynamic range compression. But this is a way for me to turn down those really soft sounds without taking anything away from speech. So this is also a great tool as well. But again, the automatic fine tuning is really a way to help somebody that might be new to fitting hearing aids until you get more comfortable with actually doing everything yourself. But again, the more that you play with the hearing aids, the more you're taking them away from their prescription. So definitely try to touch it as least as possible and utilize counseling.